Dude, I wouldn't talk about
Richard
that.
Prody was one of Joe Reynolds.
What?
Do you watch people in there? Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
I don't
Wow.
know. Every time I go there,
Nobody in
and then of course
Away
one
from
day
the
we
afterwards.
it's like just
Yeah, luckily it's slow today, so mom goes, hey, you know what? I'm gonna leave the office for a few hours. Supposed to get over it.
You know if Joel from Desert Ridge is going to
I
be
don't know. I haven't talked to
don't know.
anyone really.
Yeah, I know he was putting the word out a little bit.
Yeah.
So I don't know what he's up now. Right, exactly right.
All right. Good luck.
guys, we're going to go ahead and kick it off. Grab a seat or don't, whatever you guys want. Well, we'll leave this over here. So one thing, first of all, thank you guys for coming. Thanks very much for anybody that's on the stream right now. I asked Earl if I could open it up, and he said as long as I steered clear of talking about anything that I'm knowledgeable about. So that's going to keep it very, very short. What I wanted to ask is if you have a question for Earl while we're on the fly here, for the sake of the folks that are on the stream, if you could grab the mic and use the microphone to ask the question so the folks on the stream are able to hear us. Thank you very much. We're going to go through some theoretical stuff. We'll blast through that. You're welcome to touch and play with everything that's here. By the way, introduction, this is Oz. Oz is the founder of Broadcast Rentals. So Oz, thanks for letting us do this today. So once we're done doing the theoretical stuff, you're welcome to touch and play with everything in the place as long as you want. So that's it. The floor is yours.
Yay. My name's Earl. I've been in broadcast about 13 years. Come on in closer, guys. So I'm going to try to take you through some of the things that I know I've discovered about cameras, and a lot of it you're going to know too. If you got any questions, just stop, ask me, whatever else. Okay, so in case any of you had any doubts, cameras are now computers with lenses. You know, and so as the computer industry grows, gets better, it gets faster, it gets more capacity, more storage, cameras follow along, same thing. And if any of you are familiar with Sony cameras and Sony menus, this ought to look somewhat familiar. And it's the thing that'll drive you crazy, especially on the bigger cameras with the bigger menus. All of a sudden, something is grayed out. It's like, why can't I get into this damn thing, okay? And I would tell you that's one of the main things. If you have a camera, you need to play, you need to get familiar with it, you need to get comfortable with it, because at some point this is going to jump up and bite you, and you need to have the ability to figure out, why is this happening to me and how do I correct it? It just takes time. Oops. Quit. Okay, so the heart, if the computer and the menu is the brains, the sensor is the heart of the system. So pixels, you all understand pixels, right? Picture elements. So some of the cameras back behind Jerry there, that's an HDX 900 Panasonic. That camera is 1280 720 native. That's how that chip is designed. But it can do 1920 1080. For those who are familiar with the Canon 5D Mark II, it's 5600 by 3700, but it also does 1920 1080. So you got to ask yourself, what are all those extra pixels doing? What are they for? How much am I using? What's going on? So basics, little chip, more is in focus. So you have your little cameras like Panasonic 160s or anything else. Almost everything's in focus. You get your big chips like the DSLRs or the Super 35s. You start getting shallow depth of field. So that's the basics. Excuse me. The other thing is, bigger the pixel, lower the lightability. It's a bigger bucket. It can contain more photons. If you get into problems, you can always bump up the ISO or gain. If you're working with a small chip camera, that's going to introduce a fair amount of noise. If you're working with a big chip camera, probably not a big deal. And all you guys know what black balance and APR is? Yes, no, maybe? Okay. Okay. Broadcast cameras, you know, there's a switch on these guys that says auto white balance. But if you push the switch the other way, it's auto black balance. And it goes in and it looks and corrects dirty pixels, bad pixels as best it can. APR is something that Sony has on a lot of their cameras, like the FS7, F55. APR goes in and corrects bad pixels also. A couple of years ago, I had a guy wanted to rent a camera from us. It wasn't exactly our camera. It was a Sony F800. We had 700s. He wanted an 800. He rented the camera. It was a cross rental. He went out. Next day, I got this really nasty phone call. He just chewed me out one side and down the other. He said, "This camera's horrible. You know, it's got bad pixels. It's dirty, da-da-da-da." And I said, "Sorry, you know, bring it in. I'll take a look at it." Brought it in, looked at it, performed an APR, handed it back to him, and it was perfect. So it was a deal to where you need to know the equipment you're working with, and you need to know if something happens, how to correct it. Okay, so here's the magic. Full frame, Super 35, Micro Four Thirds, 1/3 inch, and 2/3 inch. This camera is 2/3 inch. This little guy is full frame. So again, the bigger the chip, the shallower depth of field, better able to work in low light and give you good results. Oops. So don't be blown away by the size of the camera. There's your little full frame, which can run circles around that 2/3 inch. It doesn't look like it, but it can. Come on. There we go. Oops. There we go. Back up one. Nope, nope, up here. Okay. There you go. Stay there. Okay. Okay, so this was just after the Canon 5D Mark II came out. That's a Panavision lens. That's probably a $300,000 lens on that camera. And if you look down here, it even says Canon 5D Mark II. They went to all the trouble to manufacture all this to be able to mount that camera on the end of that lens just because of the sensor on the camera. That's how good that sensor is. Yay. Okay. So how do we get here? Motion picture film is running this direction. Still images is running this direction. That's a full frame. That's a full motion picture frame. So this is Super 35. That's full frame. That's how we got here. Okay. So if you think about it, that's kind of where the problem is. This is 2/3 inch. That's the sensor size in this guy. I've got a big lens here that is able to really zoom. It's a 42 times zoom. Super 35 is that camera, so I need a bigger lens to be able to cover a wider area. Gets more expensive. Full frame, even bigger. So now that's why you saw that giant Panavision lens on that 5D. You got to have incredible optics to be able to work with those big sensors, and it costs a lot. Okay. Okay, so if I put that Super 35 on that full frame, I get that. Okay, that Super 35 lens is not designed to cover the full frame. I get vignetting. Also, most of these cameras have CMOS sensors, which means they scan, which if you're not careful and you're trying to do something really nifty and you're trying to really crank up the shutter speed and make everything look nice and clear and precise, you can get a really nice, interesting rolling shutter effect. You may not want it. Okay, so all these guys have different lens mounts. That's a B4. That actually is a Sony E-mount. This is a Sony E-mount. We have PL lenses and PL cameras here. PL is out of the motion picture industry. That big Panavision camera had a PL mount. EF is Canon, which is what this is. The interesting thing about the Sony E-mount is it's so narrow, it's so short, that allows the addition of adapters, converters, like Metabones and others. So it's really a flexible mount. Okay, now we're going to do a little, oops, let's see. Let's see, let me go this way a little bit. I'm not even sure where we are. Okay, so we're down there a ways looking at that image. I'm not even sure how far away we are, a ways away. Anyway, so I'm going to zoom out. And everything looks really good, okay? I'm going to zoom in again. And this time I'm going to screw up the back focus. Okay, so there's my cartoon, and this time when it come out, doesn't look so great, because I just messed up the back focus. So I'm going to zoom in again. Check. Zoom out. Now I'm going to adjust the back focus. And lock it down. Now I'll try it again. It's easy. There's no magic to it. You want to zoom in, check, focus, zoom out. You want to have a monitor with detail or sharpness extremely high. You want to have the lens wide open. Inside here, the lens is wide open. And you do it a couple times until you feel comfortable. So what I was adjusting was this little knob on the back of that B4 lens. This is a macro knob, and this is for close-up work. The problem is if this isn't in the detent position and it's kicked out and you start doing back focus, it's going to fight you all day long. So you have to make sure that that is in the detent click position. Okay. Everybody know the difference between 4K and UHD? Okay, so here's our HD frame, 1920 1080, 16:9 ratio. Here's UHD, so I take 4 of these, stack them together. I still have 16:9. I'm 3840 by 2160. If I add a gutter over here, I'm now 4096 by that same 2160. I'm now at a 17:9 ratio. So if I shoot true 4K, I'm not at 16:9 to fit on a regular monitor. I've got to do something with this. I either have to do a little letterbox or an edge crop or something. If you're shooting 4K only to crop in to get a closer image, that's no big deal. If you're shooting 4K because I want to use the whole image, you have to consider that ahead of time. And the same thing with 2K. So there is a difference, 4K and UHD. And there's also a difference in how we send that signal down through cables. So regular BNC cables, you have to be careful. If you see a dielectric here, that's a 50 ohm cable. You don't want to see anything there because every time you run through one of those 50 ohms, you lose 5% of your signal. And if you're trying to go a long ways with it, you're going to lose too much signal. We've got dedicated.
I was going to bring up a point. When we were setting this up earlier, we mistakenly used a standard BNC cable for our web feed, and it was crushing the signal enough that we lost audio over the HDSDI line. We swapped out the cable, and it solved everything. So if you're in one of those environments where you've got something weird happening, like something simple, like you suddenly don't hear the audio that you should be hearing, it may be something as simple as an SDI versus BNC cable.
Yeah, and HDMI was never designed for any distance. HDMI was meant to go from a computer on your desktop to the LCD on your desktop. It wasn't designed to go 25, 30, 50, or 100 feet. So, plus it's not a secure connector, and if you get it cocked at an angle sometimes, you may get 11 of the 12 pins making connection, and it says, oh yeah, I'm making connection, but it doesn't work. So, I hate HDMI. BNC is a positive block. HDSDI cable that we have here, the difference between normal BNC cable is most normal BNC cable is filaments. It's multi-strand. HDSDI is a single solid core, which means it's harder to roll up, so we have it on reels. So that's why we can deal with it easier.
Hey, Earl, you want to maybe explain, so you're using your HDMI signal off of your laptop. You want to describe how you're getting from that HDMI over to the switcher? Because you converted to SDI, correct?
Yeah. So we've got these nifty little black boxes here called DAC70s, made by Data Video. They can accept VGA, HDMI, or HDSDI in one end. The other end will spit out HDMI or HDSDI at whatever flavor you tell it to be at. And then actually going into that monitor, we have a little guy which converts the HDSDI signal back to an HDMI, very small little converter. Okay, works very well. One of the nice things about this DAC70 is if you're working with Macs, Macs are very smart if you're coming out there HDMI. They see what's on the other end, and they have a tendency to not want to play nicely sometimes, especially if you have multiple things connected to them. They'll see one thing and say, I'll play with this, but not with that, or I'm not going to play with either one. This little guy will eliminate the problem because he's sort of the dead end of the Mac. The Mac sees him and doesn't see anything else. So once you get to him, you're usually good. If you got to go a long ways, this is Triax. This is a 3-conductor cable. This is carrying everything. This is carrying power. It's carrying audio. It's carrying video. It's pretty amazing what this single conductor can do. And that's good for 1,000 meters, so a little bit better than half a mile. If you've got to go on really long runs, then you're going to be on optical fiber. And we have converters that will convert from HDSDI or BNC to fiber, and then back again on the other end. So fiber, you can run kilometers, no big deal. Okay, everybody familiar with different frame rates and what they're playing with? Okay, so 60i is the evening news, 30p, 24p, 60p you need to be a little bit careful about because some of the older monitors, there's a 9-inch Sony back there, can't deal with 60p. So at times be a little bit cautious if you're going to play in true 60p. And variable frame rate, okay, everybody done that before? Okay, so that's off speed. That's time lapse or slow motion or whatever you want to do, okay. The minute you go off speed, you lose your audio or almost always lose your audio. Panasonic had a camera a few years ago called the AF100 it had two settings. The first setting said, do you want to go variable frame rate, yes or no? And then the second setting was, what are you going to change it to? What they didn't tell people was that the minute you said, yes, I want to go to variable frame rate, it cut out the audio, even if you kept the camera at a standard frame rate. And there were quite a few people lost audio and they weren't happy.
But what's the difference between, say, 59.94 to 60i and 60p?
This is an interlace, this is progressive. So 60 progressive, 60 interlace. You know, there's interlace and progressive, okay. Progressive is, I'm giving you the whole thing at one time. It's a complete image, everything. Both fields, it's a whole frame of video. 60i is two fields to make a frame. Okay, and I'm referring to things here that are kind of in the Sony world, so some of the Sony terminology. But this is fairly common across everything. Sony has a codec called XAVC, and it comes in two flavors, XAVC-I and L. I is interframe, L is long GOP, which is group of pictures. So what it's saying, or what I says is, I'm recording every frame. Every frame I see, I'm recording to the media. Long GOP says I'm recording a frame here, skipping a few frames and recording a frame here, skipping a few and recording a frame here, and then I'll figure it out what should be in between these with my algorithms, which works really good in most cases. You get about 3 times the recording length doing L as opposed to I. The problem is, if I were to shoot something like a tree outside and the wind blowing, and all these leaves floating around, and then I come in and I want to edit that to a different scene, all of a sudden I'm asking the codec and the editing system to figure out what that tween is between all those moving leaves and this other scene, and it's sometimes difficult to the point to where you'll get artifacting. And everybody ever shot RAW? Okay, RAW is actually not video. It's pure data. Okay, so you don't have an image until you manipulate it in post. So what you're doing is you're taking those photons that are striking those pixels and you're counting them up and you're putting all that information into the media. Then on the other end, you're taking that plus some of the metadata, which is telling you this was probably red, this was probably green, this was probably blue, and you're taking that and folding it back together to come up with an image, which you have almost total control over, everything. The codecs, which most of us shoot all the time normally, already have all that baked in before it leaves the camera. So the codecs are video, they're an image you can see. RAW is not really an image you can see immediately. Anybody shot S-Log or any of the logs? Okay. Normally, well, in years past, let's say normally, the idea of the exposure was a linear deal. And what happened was, as you got toward the top of this gamma curve, this is the bright area here, and you had a lot of information up there, but it was all compressed to the point to where you couldn't really make sense of it or even see it. So the difference was when they came up with the log system, which stretches out this axis, and as you come up in your gamma curve, it starts to space that information out. So now you have more information to deal with and you can actually see it better. So there's what log gamma looks like before it's color graded. Very muddy, very plain, very yuck. But it gives you that ability to work with the gamma curve and come back with better results. You're able to see more information into the light areas and more information into the dark areas. And for you guys that want to do 6K and 8K and everything else, get your media ready because you're going to be sucking it up big time. So ProRes Quad 4, 1.7 gigs per second. Okay, and then we come to color, 8, 12, 10. Even though this says it can do 16 million colors, this is the important thing, 255 steps. If you've ever seen an image of something that has a very subtle and gradual gradation to it, sometimes you'll see some banding in there at times. You can actually distinguish it. That's because of those 255 steps. It just doesn't have enough information or enough ability to distinguish. This probably isn't as important as it used to be, but it still can happen. So here was a guy that backed up his stuff to the cloud, and he was probably trying to do some cut rate stuff and, you know, come up with a little bit better profit and loss margin. And wherever he backed it up to, the government seized it and he lost all his media. And let's go back to this guy for a second. This is what I'm referring to. You should be able to adjust a camera, no matter what kind, to the point to where you can use one finger, take your finger off, and the camera will basically stay exactly where you want it to be. And good tripods will allow you to do that. And I've got a whole bunch of excuse me, adjustments here. First off, I've got the camera plate, which belongs to the camera. I've got this device, which is called the sled, and the sled actually supports both the camera and the lens because this assembly is so heavy. On the bottom of the sled is the tripod plate, which belongs to the tripod. So I can adjust all those in relation to each other to come where I want to be. Then in addition to that, I also have on this side a lever here that this entire top plate can move forward and back to again achieve a better balance. And in addition to that, I have steps of drag in both pan and tilt, and I have counterbalance springs here. So by adjusting all these different things correctly, you can achieve that fingertip control. And quite a few years ago, thanks. We had a guy working here, and a bunch of us went up to Sedona for a major shoot. And it was the, excuse me, Western Governors Conference. Arnold Schwarzenegger was there, all the other governors from the West were there. And we had 3 cameras in the room. And one of the guys out of here was on the big camera at the back of the room. He had like a 55 times box lens on it, like you see at football games. So he's at the very back of the room. He's shooting a thing. The thing went on for probably an hour and a half. It was your CNN. And at the end of it, I walked over to him, and he's sweating and is almost like trembling in a whole bit. What the heck's going on? He says, oh, that was really rough. And I went up to his camera, unlocked the head, and it was like, oh! He spent an hour and a half muscling that camera to keep it in the right position. So he was totally exhausted by the time it was over. So, bottom line, you get out there, you're on site, everybody's breathing down your neck. Results, what's the matter? Why isn't something working? Number one issue is going to be cables. Always cables, 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 cables. Next will be, I got something going in that should be going out. It sounds really simple, but it happens all the time. You know, I've got an output that really is an input. I just blew it away, didn't look at it closely, and it's like it screwed everything else up. So, audio, I hate audio with a passion. It's the worst part though. It's what's going to kick you forever, because usually with video you can see it's there, it's not. Audio is know, it's subjective and it's also highly technical. So you got a bunch of things going against you. I'd say the last part is the most important. If you have a problem and you beat your head against the wall, you can't figure out what's going on, drag somebody else over, have them stand there, have them look at it, get another set of eyeballs or another brain. You know, that's going to probably solve your problem. So that's as far as I'm going to go with this. You guys have any questions? This can be in the back of a big ballroom. Like typically this is something that we would put into like JW Marriott Desert Ridge, which has the biggest ballrooms in Arizona. They're 150 feet across. So this would be in the back of the ballroom. This would be getting a tight head and shoulders on the guy at the podium 150 feet away. This is also actually, technically, this is called a sports lens. So for sporting events, they would use this. The next step up from this is what I referred to before about a box lens, where you see an effect. That's a box lens. So the step above this is this. This is the camera body. The major sports guys, major networks, these are specially designed systems to where that camera body just basically slides right into the lens, and the whole thing is a contained system. And again, just like here, he's probably got 85 or 90 pounds of camera and lens and other GAC on this thing. And if he did it right, he's on his fingertips moving that camera around just that gently. And again, on this, just like him, he's got COM. This cable is carrying COM also. There's a receptacle for a headset here. So when you're operating this camera, normally you're on COM, you've got a COM system on, and you're listening to somebody talking to you, directing you. And this camera, let's see which one have I got here. Okay. So that camera is controlled by this device called a CCU, camera control unit, and this, which is called the remote control panel. So I have total control over what the camera's doing. I can paint it. Basically, when you're in a situation like this, the only thing the cameraman does is pan, tilt, zoom, and focus. Everything else is contained here. And let me show you one more thing. Anybody here operate Sony DSLRs? Besides you? Okay. This is something that some may know and some may not know. So this is a A7S II. This is a 35 Zeiss Compact Prime on it. And so this is a fixed lens, okay? 35 millimeter. So what I'm doing is something called clear image on a Sony. I can double the focal length of the lens on the Sony. And it's on, huh? Yeah, clear image. Have you ever used it before? Yeah, we've had these Sonys for over a year, and all of a sudden, one day, a month or two ago, Jerry was going to shoot the blood moon that happened a month or two ago, I guess. And the longest lens we had is a 70 to 200 Canon. And he wanted to get tighter, so we started looking around. It's like, oh, shit, all these cameras can do this, you know. You can make a 200 to 400. We didn't even know it, okay. So there's all kind of nifty little tricks. That's one real nifty trick that Sony can do. Any other questions? Oh, let me explain one more thing too. If you operate cameras like this is an FS7 or the FS5 or the F5 or the F55. These cameras are Super 35, but they also can do what's called a center crop. So they can actually crop their sensor into a much smaller image in the middle. What that allows us to do now with some adapters and some other things is we can actually take this lens, which was designed for a 2/3 inch sensor, and put it onto this camera using the crop mode and some other things and come up with just some amazing results. So now I've got a big piece of glass on a camera that was never designed for it, but it can work very nicely. Any other questions? Anything?
So you said the table distance, HDSCI 350, beyond that you say triax and fiber?
Yeah, you can. At 350, I would drop an HDSDI DA onto it if I wanted to keep going on HDSDI. Obviously, this stuff's good for 1,000 meters, so that doesn't even, it's not even breathing hard at that point. Fiber, obviously, is the best, but fiber also has, as you may have seen, some nuances to it. It can get dirty, you can get dirt into it, you can have problems with that. It can be broken. You have to be careful about the fiber itself. And also, to some extent, you have to be aware of what type of fiber ends you're working with, because there's different types of connectors on fiber. So most of it is ST, but not everything. And if you don't ask, you may end up with something that's incompatible.
Do you guys carry a lot of fiber?
We've got a roll of 500-foot TAC4 fiber, and we've got what are called FIDOs, which convert from HDSDI to fiber and then fiber to HDSDI.
Comparison to like TV, video, and film, is there a preference on shooting with a different camera or lenses, or is that just based on personal preference?
That's your that's your personal preference. When I started in this a long time ago, video was over here and motion picture stuff was over there, and there wasn't anything in between, and you couldn't get from one to the other. And then way back when, I think it was Panasonic brought out the DBX 100, which was a little standard def camera, not very big, but it could do 24p, and all of a sudden it's like, my God, you know, 24p was the holy grail because that was the film rate. So you got that stutter effect. You started to look a little bit more cinematic. And then the Canon 5D Mark II came out, and that blew the whole thing wide open because all of a sudden you had this incredible sensor that could do 24p, super shallow depth of field. We did some studies here where we had a mannequin head and we put it on a long table. We were seeing how shallow things really could get, and we could get it to the point to where the nose would be in focus and the ears would be out of focus. I mean, that shallow. So almost more than you need, but again, that ability. Because that was the thing, you want to be able to have selective focus. I'm sitting at a dining table, I'm in focus. The guy at the next table behind me is nice and soft. So, yeah.
When you have budget concerns, you have a smaller budget. I've heard through the grapevine that you invest in glass more than you do the body. What's your opinion on that?
Yep, exactly right. This will end up going to 4K. It started out as SD. It's now HD. This, in most cases, if it's good glass, doesn't care. It's going to be here no matter what I put back here. And the same for things like that. Here's a red, but it's got a Canon lens because the Canon lens is good enough to be able to support that imager. So yeah, glass is, you know, if you take care of it, glass is forever. And what's funny is now there's guys who go back looking for old glass because they like the way it looked. You know, everything now is, you know, 4K, 6K, 8K, super pin sharp, super detail. And there's a lot of guys who say, I kind of like the old stuff that was a little softer, a little grainier, a little felt more homey than maybe 8K does. So yeah, glass is definitely a place to put your money. Anything else? Yes.
When you're looking for buying lenses, what typically are you like into?
Well, okay. I would say flexibility. This is a Zeiss Compact Prime. Okay. One of his nice things is he's a full frame, so I can cover this camera. I can also slap him onto almost any other DSLR or even these cameras, and he'll cover them too, even though he's not exactly meant for that. I can also change out his back. I can change him from EF to PL or even something else if I wanted to. So I've got a lot of flexibility with that lens. So I would say flexibility. A lot of people just like the look of a lens. Again, it's really subjective, but you know, maybe you like how the lens looks. Sometimes it's how many blades are in the lens itself, how circular, how nice the image looks out of focus. On cheaper lenses, you're going to get fewer blades. It may look a little like a pentagon or hexagon or something. On a really good one, it'll just be nice and soft and round. And then the other thing is, this lens is designed to be used with follow focus. That lens was never designed to be used with follow focus. This is a still lens. That's a cinematic lens. So when Canon designed this lens, the only thing they had in mind was shooting still images. So I shoot a still, I shoot another still. I'm not recording a big long linear chunk with it. I'm not changing focus or anything else. Because of that, some of these lenses will what they call breathe. So when you go to change focus during video, you'll kind of they'll bloom and then they'll come back again because they were never designed to actually change focus while they were being recorded. These lenses were designed that way. Let's see, what else? This lens is the stock lens on this FS7. This thing is a piece of junk. This is f4, so it's hard to begin with. It's got a lousy f-stop. It's got a whole bunch of automatic features or semi-automatic features. If I snap this ring forward in that position, it's autofocus. If I snap it back that way, it's manual focus. If I don't know that ahead of time and I got him up here and I'm trying to focus, he's going to fight me. He's got other features in here which are also semi-automatic or trying to be semi-automatic. This camera is a fantastic camera. However, it came out of Sony's prosumer side. So this was never designed as a, quote, professional camera, if you will. But it's such a good camera, the pros are using it like crazy. But you have to sort of understand the, not limitations, but the pitfalls of where he's trying to become automatic at times and work around that. If you understand that, it's an amazing camera.
What's the best handheld camera for like low light setting?
I'm sorry, so
What's the best camera handheld for low light setting?
27S2. We've got Zacuto rod systems here. I'd put that camera on a Zacuto rod system. I would probably also, well, let me grab one thing here real quick. What's the biggest problem with these cameras? Huh? No, the physical problem with these cameras. What physical limitations does a camera like this have? You don't have any professional XLR connectors on it. Okay. You only have a little mini there to get your audio in. And in some cases, you can't even monitor the audio. So what I like to do is, if I were to do what you want to do, and I had to run and gun with that in all kind of conditions, I would put a rod system together. I would mount him on the rod system. I would record into him, and I have my XLR connectors. So now I got the best of all worlds. And I just found out this week that video devices stopped making these things, which absolutely breaks my heart. This was the most fantastic tool there is.
Did they come out with something that better than that, or
No, I'm heading for NAB in a few weeks. I'm going to try to find out what the hell's going on. But at this point, I don't know. Well, we got Atomos, we got all these other companies. The problem is that we're a rental house. If you want to find out how to break something, put it into a rental house operation. This is nice, hard metal, unlike the plastic of most Atomos. So this is going to hold up, and it has held up. So that's the way we like it. You guys doing great. Any more questions? You got an old guy here who's been around for a while.
what's the best device for audio when you're trying to receive audio on the go?
As far
Audio like mics and things like that, like mic stand for your
we've got Sennheiser 416 boom mics, which they're pretty much the standard as far as boom mics go for like motion picture work.
Are you talking about like the extra recording device itself? No, I'm talking about just like the device itself. I know we audio, so like with like boom that is versatile to be able to go.
Yeah, we can show you here in a minute. We got Mark 60 and 416 Sennheiser booms. We also if you want to go really nuts, we have the 788T, which is discrete 8 channels of record. But we also have a Zoom recorders that'll do it, 1 or 2 channels. So we've got all the way from that down to nice little Zoom recorders. So, but it's mainly the mic, and it's there you go. So. I'm not sure what's inside this guy. This is probably, that's a 60, so. So there's your Sennheiser 60 boom microphone. We also have what's called a boom mate, which holds the boom itself, so you don't have to have somebody holding it, especially if you're doing, wow, it's just like, so you can put a C-stand on this, especially if you have somebody like doing, or a series of people, let's say, doing interviews in a chair type deal. You don't want to put a mic on, but you don't want to see the mic, but you want to have good audio. So doing something like this is a really easy, good solution. Okay, keep going. Although I will say I'd rather do camera questions than audio questions, but that's just me. Anything else?
Here's maybe a trickier one, maybe some of the audience doesn't understand, but we went to interlace and progressive. Interlace has to do with NTSC, which is broadcasting form, right? Am I correct about that? What is that?
There used to be 3 world standards in television. There was NTSC, which was the US and I think Japan. There was CCAM, which was Russia and a few others. And then there was PAL, which was Europe and a bunch of others. Today, I think CCAM has pretty much gone away. Nobody plays with it anymore. So it's down to NTSC and PAL. We are NTSC. Europe is PAL. The main difference is NTSC is 60 hertz, PAL is 50 hertz. Okay, that's one of the big differences. Back in the original days, now that we've gotten into HD, a lot of the NTSC parameters have gone away, because originally the guys in video, when you ask them about NTSC, they said it stood for never the same color twice. Okay. PAL was a better system, but now that we've hit HD, almost all those considerations have gone away. But mainly it's NTSC is 60 hertz, PAL is 50 hertz. Where you run into problems is if I take my 60 hertz camera and I go to Europe and I'm shooting away, the lights are doing 50 hertz, my camera's doing 60 hertz, and I can get flickers. Okay. You just have to be aware of that. You can work around it, but you have to at least be aware that that's the kind of thing that can pop up and get you. But NTSC is still here.
Yeah. I was curious about interlacing then and broadcasting like that.
Yeah, Sony, well, I mentioned before about the problems with a true 60p signal. Sony has for a long time, and maybe they still do, I haven't checked recently, they like to do something called progressive segmented frame, which basically says I'm kind of doing 60p, but I'm doing it in a 60i environment, and they call it PSF. And that's what Sony operates by. So if I give Sony a true 60p, it's going to choke on it. If I give them a 60 PSF, they're probably going to be fine. On for yeah, well, most of the cameras, I mean, almost all these cameras now, if you go down through the menus, like maybe next to the last or something, there's going to be a menu item that says country. Okay. You hit country and it's going to say, are you NTSC or are you PAL, or which you want to play at. It'll change the frequency of the camera. The bigger issue maybe is when I showed you that image of the helicopter with the warped blade because of the scan or because of the CMOS artifacting. I came out, I spent a lot of years in the aerospace industry. The thing that drives me nuts is to see somebody taking shots of an aircraft and to see the blades slowly going around as it's in flight because they got the shutter cranked up so high, and you're going like, it looks horrible. I mean, so again, just think before you shoot some of this stuff, especially if it's moving at a high speed, about your shutter speed, what it's going to do, what kind of artifact you're going to get, be aware that can happen. And also, if you take a camera like this, and I do a whip pan, all of a sudden I'm going to get my verticals leaning over. Okay, so they call that jello cam sometimes. It's just a matter of that CMOS imager doing the scan, and I start up here, and as I get down here, the thing has moved. The only camera that we have that doesn't have that is our big Sony F55, which has what's called a global shutter. So it just chunks the whole thing at one time, and there's no scan problems. But it's expensive.
So do you have something moving at a faster speed than up the shutter, or lower?
Again, it's subjective. What are you trying to accomplish? Do I want to show? Do you want to show this nice smooth propeller, or do I want to stop it down to where I see this weird-looking bunch of jagged lines? Yeah. Again, it's very subjective how you do that.
Here's a decent one maybe for some of the people. Shutter angle versus shutter speed.
Depends whether you came out of the video world or the film world. Same thing. They have angle and percentage of speed. You can swap them back and forth. The same thing as ISO and gain. Same thing, just depends where you started from. So I can have ISO or I can have gain. Doesn't make any difference, same thing. That camera has gain. That camera may or may not have gain, but I can also tell the camera on the menu to do ISO. Same thing. This is too easy. Come on up and play. So for those who don't know, let me describe some things. This is the Sony FS7 on a Dana dolly. Okay. So go ahead and push that and see how smooth that is.
So is this another attachment, or does this come with the camera?
This viewfinder comes with the camera. This is an additional one back here.
So what's the difference between the two cameras, and what is it capturing, or the
Well,
purpose?
it's just usually if, in some cases, I don't want to be up here trying to do something, especially if I'm trying to do a little dolly shot. I'd rather be back here. So I may have that, but I want to have this so it's easier for me to see. The other thing is I may leave this one just the way it is, but I may make this one, I may take all the information off this because I don't want to see the information. I can see the information there. I may just want to have a clean, I just want to have a clean image to work with, so this gives me an option. Actually, these are special wheels. They take like some special type of skateboard wheel, then they go back and they actually do additional work to them.
I was like, these look like skateboard wheels.
Yeah, they're skateboard wheels on steroids. I mean, they're really incredible because they work at it to the point to where they just don't have any blemishes or any problems.
Like you were dipping WD-40 for
Do you have to end up a lot?
I'm sorry, what?
Do these last a long time, or do you end up having to replace these?
Now these last, these almost would last forever probably if you behave yourself. This is only designed to run on this kind of pipe. So if you keep the pipe in good shape and you keep the wheels fairly clean, there's not much that's going to go wrong. Yeah.
So is this the battery component?
Yeah, this camera has got some interesting things on it. The normal FS7 stops here. So this is an optional back on the FS7. This optional back allows it to do a couple of things. One, I can record ProRes to the internal cards, which are in here, with this back on it. Without the back, I can't record ProRes in here. The other thing the back does, besides hold this nice big B-Wedge battery or an Anton Bauer, is it also gives me raw out.
Oh, okay. So when you shoot things in RAW, you get more freedom in the editing process to do more things?
Yeah, again, think about the fact that the raw is just data, and I can really tell. It's just like, I don't know if you've ever shot like a DSLR raw to where you can go in. It gives you tremendous ability to adjust light, dark, color, all these things, contrast the whole bit. That's the whole idea of raw, is it gives you almost unlimited flexibility to correct things.
So if you're shooting something, do you want to shoot it in the RAW form if you're trying to have more freedom, or if you have like an idea, you shoot it in the codex form?
I would say a lot of it depends on who's going to do the post-processing, who's going to edit it, how much time do they have, how good is their system, how patient are they? You know, are they going to get pissed off after 4 or 5 hours of fighting with raw data and say that's it, I'm not doing this crap again?
We do a lot of the editing for our things and do a lot of our own individual shoots, so we end up doing a lot of the shoots and the editing. So I know I've been learning a lot of the editing process and going into shooting, and so like we haven't shot anything in RAW, so I just wondered about how that would be in the editing process and how that is comparison to just shooting it in the codex form.
A lot more involved. I mean, it gives you a lot more flexibility, but it's more involved. It's going to take, the files are much, much larger usually. So you're going to have to deal with a whole lot more data, and you're going to have to be able to store a whole lot more data. So
We should try shooting some videos in RAW so that we can like kind of do some crazy stuff with the editing.
That's how my camera put my camera in raw. Then he talked about the raw footage that day. He was like,
well, but I'm not sure that all DSLRs can actually shoot video in RAW. They can do stills in RAW. Yeah, I think shooting raw video is a different animal. So. Come on, play. I've lost track. Flame Inferno, some, yeah. We had Shogun, so it's not Shogun.
Shinobi.
Okay.
It just came out, yeah. It's
Okay.
like 400 for
Okay.
5.2 for tomorrow. Like I said, better version of the flame or the
Yeah.
Inferno.
Yeah, probably one of